Hi, this is Eric Dryman, host of the Hooks and Hoses podcast. Welcome to another edition of the Fire Engineering Network's podcast. To my left, I have Chief Doug Klein, and to my farthest left, we have Aaron Magruder. So, Chief, would you like to tell? Chief has his own podcast as well, so tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Eric, it's good to be here. I do fire and training as a podcast with fire engineering and focus on information so that everybody gets great knowledge so that everyone goes home. That's the big focus. And we've got the right guest here today.
Yes, we do. We certainly do. So, Aaron, tell us a little about yourself and your background.
My name is Aaron Magruder. I'm Instructional Program Manager for a state training agency in Kansas. Before that, I worked as a curriculum specialist for a state training agency in Missouri. So I have about 10 years of state training exposure where I've been able to go into major metros, small departments, everywhere in between. I've also been a volunteer firefighter for Firefighter EMT for 22 years. I'm a member of a female USAR team, and I just came off a state USAR team after about 15 years of engagement. So been playing in the industry for a little while. I'm also a fellow and a state advocate for the National Fallen Firefighter Foundation and a board of directors member for International Society of Fire Service Instructors.
Very good. And you have a very extensive educational background, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point.
I'm still enrolled in class and still pursuing academia. Yes.
All right. Well, before we go any further, I want to thank our podcast sponsor, Firehouse Subs, the firefighter-founded hot sub chain with a passion for hearty, flavorful food, heartfelt service, and public safety. Ready for your next mission, Firehouse Subs is offering firefighters the opportunity to continue serving after service now as restaurant owners. And you can learn more by visiting the Firehouse Subs franchising.com website. So thanks again to Firehouse Subs. So, Aaron, the reason that I asked you to come on to the podcast today, and Chief Klein as well, he's got an extensive background in education, but you kind of, in my opinion, from my exposure to you, you kind of specialize, or specialize might not be the right word, but you certainly have a depth of knowledge when it comes to adult education and training adults, and how to get through to them and how to improve the program delivery so that we're not killing our students with PowerPoint, the whole death by PowerPoint phrase that we've heard so many times. How did you initially come to develop that as a passion, or what drove you in that direction as far as your background with your education and curriculum development and all those sorts of things?
Well, I enjoy my origin story. So as a volunteer, every volunteer has a day job, which mine has been in state training, like I said, for the last 10 years. And for University of Missouri, my role was curriculum specialist. So regardless of our title, I had my hands in the curriculum, helping build PowerPoint, determining what content was in it, what not. As we developed those classes and handed them off to instructors and saw the deliveries in the field, very traditional instructional methodology, it was the only thing we knew. However, as a volunteer, I got tapped and was able to work for our academy. We were doing hazmat awareness and ops, firefighter 1 and 2. As a lead instructor, it was a different paradox for us because we were doing almost a 220-hour program and using almost no PowerPoint. And the quick adaptive learning of the students in that no PowerPoint environment versus that PowerPoint environment really was kind of a conflict for me. Like, I didn't expect to see my nights and weekends, 17, 18, 19-year-old, volunteers gain the level of proficiency as quickly as they were. In comparison to the folks that we had senior firefighters that were doing these hands-on classes, but mostly PowerPoint driven, and they didn't have the recall and they didn't have the skill development that we would expect them to have. And so that created a paradox for me, which led me to go back to school. I already had a master's degree, so I enrolled in a doctorate program. And so I spent a couple of years studying educational psychology. I'm now focused on specifically adult learning. And the program that I was exposed to through my volunteer department has been extensively used. Everything in the fire service is cyclical. This was something that is not new. I've had some great mentors in this. Dr. Brian Crandall is one of them. And it's just really seeing the way that's really more efficient and kind of like a plant grows towards light. I've just really tried to focus more and try to find out why this works better than what we've been doing the whole time. And as much as I've tried to kind of disprove that, hey, there's this is a gimmick, this isn't going to work, this is, there's a failure point, I haven't found those things. And so I've kind of turned the tides a little bit and go, okay, so if this is so good, why doesn't everybody do it? Right. And so that's where my exploration and research has been the last 6 years or so.
Okay. So you say that your program is not using any PowerPoint whatsoever, or the program that you were originally involved in?
There's times and places to use PowerPoint. Our agency used very, very, very little PowerPoint. Most of that was when we started talking about hazmat, because there's some abstract concepts that were really not need to know to do the job, but we had, if you will, emotional commitment to those topics. So we felt like we had to cover those topics, and PowerPoint was the only way for that instructor to cover that abstract knowledge, if you will. But when you look at our job and you say, hey, in the course of operations, there are certain skills and knowledge elements that you have to know and you have to be able to perform. Well, the best way to do those is domain of application. So if you've got to do it this way, then that's the way to learn it, and that's the way to train it and apply it later.
So when you talk about delivering the material that way and developing skills, how do you make sure that they not only know the how, but they know the why when you do? So what I'm saying is, so we stretch, or say we go to the roof, right, to vent, right? So we teach them that skill, but how do we teach them when to vertically vent versus not vertically vent if there's no classroom setting to provide that why? You see where I'm going?
So the great thing about learning and teaching and learning in domain of application, or what's affectionately previously been called training in context, multiple phrases refer to the same thing, is they learn the why because we teach them when they need to do it. So for instance, vertical ventilation. If you are a rural department, if you are short-staffed, if you're looking at 80% of your fires happen in an 1,800 square foot residential structure, we might never get to vertical ventilation as a tactic because we as an organization might never be able to support that in the time and coordination that it's helpful for the fire to be response. So for instance, if we do a needs analysis of our agency and we go, hey, 1,800 square foot structure, it's going to be residential, we're going to have 15 people in the first 30 minutes of the fire. What's the most important thing we need to do? Water and fire, right? We might not be able to have great staffing to put up a third line or, all these things after we get 2 in, 2 out covered and we get our attack line. We need 2 in, 2 out and attack line to be our bread and butter. Because when you put the fire out, everything else goes away, right? Everything gets better. And so training in context, we're going to serve what our greatest need is, what our biggest hammer is that we can bring to that solution, right? So when it's time, when we say, okay, we're going to have that ideal situation where we have 40 people on scene, every other facilitating function is going to happen, water is going to be on fire, now we should go cut a hole in the roof. When we're proficient at all those facilitating steps that are required for that to be actually beneficial to us, then we go, hey, what else can we do to improve the situation? Okay, command's going to give us this tactic. Now we're going to learn that tactic. But we don't teach them plays out of the playbook if they can't facilitate that function, if it's not relevant to what our built environment or our response package is going to be. We give them situational awareness. We're going to have a discussion when we teach ventilation of, hey, sometimes if we can get to this point, then this might be beneficial. But the science actually shows us that, if we do horizontal ventilation right, this is going to be good and we're not going to be putting you in that high hazard.
Okay. So I got a thought here, and I've got an education background as well, and I'm old. Unfortunately, that falls into the category.
Seasoned to perfection.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You can call it what you want. It's the salty old guy that all of a sudden turns around and looks. But I remember in all the curriculums that I went through, and I am spot on with what you're saying. For our listeners, I think a way to look at this is you probably went through some type of lab class in high school. And in lab class, say biology.
Sure.
You're getting the lecture looking at the frog that you're dissecting. You're getting the information that you may want by somebody being right there showing you, maybe not necessarily a slide, but a video Like this is the situation, this is there, and it also is where you can now spawn that level of a discussion. And it's funny to listen to people talk about this new style of teaching called Socratic level. I'm like,
Yeah.
I learned that stuff in the 80s, man. That was in education. It's like,
and it's kind of named after Socrates, right? From when it like that all predates all of us.
You know,
everything is cyclical.
Yeah, so Socrates, as they call it on Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures. But you know, I think that's something that our folks need to do, and I agree with you. There's a certain time period that you got to have the didactic stuff that they see, and you got to be committed to. But you hit it though, the why and the how, and I think the why goes a long way with the how, because if they understand the why, just like what you're showing them, teaching them this is the place, I think that really plays in. And from a training perspective, you know, that's critical to me. And, you know, from an operational perspective, which I get to play in that world every once in a while, it's critical that they can relate based upon scenario-driven thought process. And that's where I think we go back to the prime decision recognition in their brains of pulling that. That's just some of the thoughts there.
Yeah. No, I think it's important to have these conversations and look at things from a different perspective. I don't have an educational background, but I'm fascinated by, you know, some of the thought processes that folks like you have, and some of the books I've read on how people's minds work and how to deliver material better to adults, right? Because as much as we want to prepare our people when they go through instructor programs, if we just use the curriculum that's provided by the state, those new instructors are going to be not adequately prepared, in my opinion, in many cases. So it's important to have this background knowledge and understand, you know, and I know there's many more, but just, you know, the different learning styles. You know, you've got your visual, your auditory, and your kinesthetic learners, and I know there's what you say yesterday, 130 or something like that. But you know, at the most basic level, there's people learn differently, right? And we need to be aware of things like that and understand that, you know, our younger generation was not brought up with bound paperback or hardback books, right? I mean, everything's multimedia or on an iPad or a laptop or whatever. So we need to realize that folks like us who have been doing this for a minute, we have to change our style, not only because it's better for the adult learner, but it's also generational differences that we have to kind of take into consideration, and how these I'd say younger folks, but, you know, newer firefighters learn differently than probably we all did when we were in school, right?
Oh, yes and no. So just turn it out a little bit. There's pedagogy, which is the study of how children learn, and there's andragogy, which is the study of adult learners.
Okay.
And there's folks in current academia that argue there's really no difference. A major attribute of adult learners is that we have experience and worldly knowledge and whatnot, and that is a deficit in children that don't have those experiences. But kind of going back to what we were saying about state curriculums and stuff, and, you know, high school, how we were taught, we tend in the fire service to model that K through 12 experience. And public education, when you go to a school of education or college and get a degree in education, it's still often focused at that K through 12 experience, building school teachers. Yeah. And that is all based on the liberal education model. And the liberal education model is we're going to brute force as much general knowledge into your head as possible. And again, that goes all the way back to Aristotle and Socrates. And the whole point of that was to build an exceptionally rounded gentleman that will become a statesman and have the philosophical capacity to discuss and negotiate and govern, right? That's not exactly what we do in the fire service, right? So even though that's the only model we've been exposed to, we still teach to every word in the textbook, and we still test to, you know, what's the third sentence, which synonym do they use when they discuss this topic? You know, we get really finite into, do you know the textbook? Because that's been largely our only exposure. Until I had this educational training experience, I didn't realize training in context, experiential learning, process testing, that these things existed. But a big disservice I think we do is we get sucked into the textbook thinking it is the Bible. That's our playbook. That's our everything. For us old folks, that's the Encyclopedia Britannica. In no way did we ever need to go memorize the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Right.
We needed to know it was there. We needed to know how to use it, kind of like the Dewey Decimal System, if we really want to throw back. When we needed information, we needed to be able and go look it up and bring it up. And so you talk about learning styles. When we talk especially about tactile, visual, auditory learners, this becomes really a challenge for us to adopt to, especially when we have folks who have dyslexia or vision impairment or whatnot. And we put them in that classroom. We have to really account for and make adaptations to how they receive and process information and how they can give output of information to try to measure those KPIs of what do they know, what do they don't know. We have to build in a lot of artificiality into how we teach, because that domain of instruction is so far away from what they have to actually do in the field. So we have to teach them in this space and get them scored up in this space. And then we abandon them to figure out how to retrieve that information later and how to use that information later. And science kind of shows us that if you learn it in one environment, those are your retrieval cues for that information. Kind of like in college, some of the tips that you might do is like if you're cramming for a test and you're chewing peppermint gum, make sure you chew peppermint gum when you take the test, because it's environmental cues that'll help you re-access information. A lot of research tells us now that we have memory cells throughout our whole body, not just our brain. There's a lot of research that shows the more you move, and even like right now when I'm moving my hands while I'm talking, if the listener is moving their hands while they're talking or they're making some sort of gestures, it helps them encode information. And then when they talk later, if they have those same movements, they can retrieve that information easier too. So when we put students in a sterile classroom, we say, sit still, 8 hours, we'll let you up, that kind of thing. And we're going to lecture to you in that passive learning environment. Just like our laptops, when you sit them still and you stop using them, you're biologically going into standby mode. I don't know if you can get 1 or 2 hours in a class before you start nodding off, but that's our biology. So that sterile environment is about, it contradicts just about everything we know about human behavior and human learning to some extent. Whereas we take them to the drill ground and we give them psychomotor movements while we talk to them, we've changed the paradigm completely. We're no longer segregating psychomotor, affective, cognitive. Now we're doing integrated instruction, and we're doing, like I said, that phrase, domain of application. We're teaching them what they need to know and what they need to do as they need to know it, as they need to do it. So when they hit the fire ground and we've taught them a sequence of action, one step pays into the next step, pays into the next step. And they'll remember the information we tell them while they're moving way better than the information we tell them while they're holding still. And so integrating training in the way that they need to be able to integrate it in the fire ground removes all the obligation for them to take really abstract stuff, find some miracle way to translate it, and then apply it in the wild.
Yeah. So good thought process on this. And I'm going to go down this road. How do we fix this problem with the people that govern how we train? Okay, I'm just going to call it out. We're in the fishbowl here at FDIC. People are walking by looking at us. They're listening. But, I don't disagree at all with what you're saying. And fortunately, we have the ability to do that in some aspects. Like we do a lot of that in Horry County. There's pump cutaways, there's hydrants. They do a lot of stuff. We've built a water mapping, components. We put them in mazes. We do a lot of stuff. And they talk through them, the whole time. The only problem is we don't test them that way, and the states don't certify them that way, and there are folks that are the certifying agencies don't do that. So how do we make this paradigm shift in our worlds that are so nostalgic and locked into one thing and one thing only?
So that's a challenge I face. That's a little more background for me. I live in mid-Missouri. I work for the state of Kansas. I do a lot of time driving, but that opportunity in the state of Kansas is to firsthand have an impact on that. So there's an opportunity in Kansas for me to go to Kansas and experiment with this fully at the state level. One of the things I was enabled to do, which I'm tremendously thankful for was I inherited the FSAC Pro Board certification. That's your traditional multiple choice test,
Yeah.
skills test kind of deal. And I was afforded the opportunity to stand up an opportunity to test using demonstrated ability. And so that legacy, if you want to take a multiple choice test, if you want to just go cram the textbook, take a multiple choice test, do a project, you can do path A, absolutely, red pill, what I tell my students. But if you want to try blue pill, we do it a little bit differently. So our traditional testing methods are set up for every JPR. There's an A, requisite knowledge, and a B, requisite skill. And for those A, requisite knowledges, we write the multiple choice test. For that B, requisite skill, we write a skill sheet, right? Again, we're segregating cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. For integrated testing for demonstrated ability, we just smush them all together. And we ask the question, what of this information and what of the skills has to be memorized in the heat of battle, has to be executed on the fly, has to be there? That gets into a process testing or a skill sheet or something we're doing with the student to make sure they can execute that tactic. That's non-discretionary time testing. The flip side, the counter to that, is discretionary time testing. So if it's like, hey, we need them to look up something in the ERG because they're going to be able to get to the scene, set up a perimeter, and do this thing. And it's best if they do this thing for a while. Okay, discretionary testing is we're going to make it match the job as much as possible. So if they can stop and take a moment in the heat of battle and use reference material, that's what the test looks like. And so there are provisions within FSAC and Pro Board for folks to test, for agencies to set up testing where it's based on what does the job look like, not what is our tradition led us to do. And the great thing about states, the way that we're set up in NAFD and certification is every agency has latitude to choose what their program looks like and within the conformity of the standards. So there's room. But just as this might give you guys cognitive dissonance, like you said yesterday, this is different, this is weird. Everybody has to either take the time to buy into it or not. And the hard part about this whole concept is one of the foundational elements is you don't truly learn something until you do it. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg, if you will.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense from the outside, but once you do it, you go, wow, right? And so it's hard to get those inroads to get started. But it is super effective. Well, everything we do to some degree is effective. This increases our efficiency of learning. So our students don't have to learn it here and then relearn it here and then relearn it here. With the integrated instruction and testing, they got it here and it's locked in. And then we can start messing with the variables to teach them more rounded of how this applies in different situations. So,
that's that big word, change.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Most folks don't like that word. And Aaron's known me for a long time. I'm the guy that doesn't mind doing it different. I'm the individual that embraces change, especially if it's good change. And I don't like change just because somebody says we need to change. Mm-hmm. Well, why are we changing? What's the purpose? What's the vision to getting it down? And one of the things that I do know about our younger generation is they're visually stimulated because of how they've been raised and how they go and how they learn. A large portion is visual. So being out there and seeing a visual or having some type of scenario driven or simulations or any of this is how they really go about doing it. And it's funny to listen. I just ran a promotional process. I'm still in the middle of those. And you put a scenario up and they say, oh, it's easy when I'm out in the streets. Mm-hmm. Okay, it is. But this is the same thing. It's in the streets. Tell me what you're going to do in the first 5 minutes. Yeah. I don't need to know what you're going to do 30 minutes from now. I could care less. You're the first arriving officer. Tell me what you're going to do. Let's get this done, And unfortunately, we've got some dinosaurs, and I'm going to call it like it is, some dinosaurs laying dinosaur eggs. Mm-hmm. And we're sitting here. We could pass a plate and take up a collection, and I really like what you're saying. I like where you're going, and the fact that you're making change at a state level. Mm-hmm. That's huge to me.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up the promotion processes because as you're describing the testing model that you have as an option, I'm thinking to myself, this sounds just like an assessment center. right? Where you go before a promotion board and you got 5 people scoring you. So how do you, I guess one thing that came to mind while you were discussing that model, it seems to me if you have a multiple choice test and you know that the answer is C, then there's no wiggle room for somebody to say, we might give him B. But I think there's the potential for some subjectivity to come into play with the other model, non-traditional model. So
absolutely, and it has its handicaps. I mean, subjectivity is one of them, and it, just like anything else in testing, if you have an essay question, have a rubric, have your quality indicators, have your evaluators well trained and trained so that they have inter-rater reliability, that we're consistent among everybody who's scoring. And it does take more time. You can't just zip it through a Scantron. And more specifically, you can't just have like an administrative assistant grade the tests, right? You have to have competent instructors. And that is one barrier. If competent instructors, competent evaluators, agreement on what right looks like, research that justifies we're trying to solve a real world problem, that we didn't just think tank some weird tactic up, and it'd be cool if we, repelled from the side of the parking garage and used the hydraulic breaker, and, that we didn't overcomplicate things. Yeah. And if you're doing it right, you've done a lot of research too, to like, okay, what's modern technology? We're not just teaching a vehicle fire class, but we're teaching a vehicle fire class that's maybe at minimum a hybrid vehicle class. So we're at least integrating the assumption that all vehicles have an alternative power source or something of that nature. And we're not just teaching a vehicle extrication class. We're starting with arrive on scene, set up traffic control. We're integrating all of those ways that typically kill us in the fire service. And we're going through those processes and setting up. So it takes time, it takes resources, it takes agreement. An agreement within an agency of what right looks like can be somewhat challenging.
It can be really challenging
from time to time. That's sometimes the hardest part is getting the tactics that you want to use, the plays in the playbook developed and implemented amongst your cadre. That can be a heavy lift, but doesn't that make the whole department better, whether you train this way or not? I mean, that's what we should have anyhow. And to your point of, the new generation being visual learners, I know you said don't bring up Maslow's, so I'm not going to go, or Bloom's. You said don't bring up Bloom's, but I am going to nerd out a little bit. I know. So sensory stimulus theory is the theory, and we often see it in the Instructor One books as the cone of learning. And what we see in the cone of learning is we are a visual-driven species more than anything. Right. So if I show you the way to do something and I tell you don't do it, your subconscious is going to latch on to what you saw done, and you're more likely to replicate that. So we all are visual learners. So where I say we don't use PowerPoint, we do start with a video of the tactic done to standard. I'm not going to say correctly. I'm going to say to the defined standard.
Okay.
And so in planning that tactic and agreeing what right looks like, we establish quality indicators, and those are required behaviors. So if we say you have to get off the rig, you have to don your PPE, all fasteners have to be fastened, and then you need to put your SCBA on, those things have to happen. If somebody gets off and they don't have their hood on, or if their stuff's not fastened or whatnot, then we stop them and we correct that measure before they move forward. And so every time every step of the tactic, we are reinforcing the agreed upon required correct behaviors. And so we've developed that video ahead of time to prove that it could be done. And it's best to use that with your instructors so they learn the tactic inherently because they can do it as well. And so when we start each lesson, we show the students visually what right looks like. And then we might give them we should give them a high level narration, but there's a whole integrated process for that. So they see what right looks like, and then we hold them accountable throughout the repetitions of practice.
So I saw something yesterday, and I think y'all both will appreciate this wrapped around what we're talking about. I was sitting in Todd Edwards' class yesterday and talking about, being aggressive tactics, things like that. And I would say that 98% of what he threw up on the screen was a picture. It was a house. There wasn't fire on the house, but hypothetically, if it's here, hypothetically it's there. Tell me what your situation is. Tell me what your problems are. And one of the things they threw out was a neat picture of this large house, 3-story. Obviously, the era and vintage was, from the early 1900s, maybe late 1800s, bloom frame construction. And, people were throwing out the typical stuff. Oh, getting to the third floor if there's a fire, or laddering and the typical stuff that you get.
Mhm.
Now, the one thing that I did see when I recognized that house comes back to like the education we do with pre-planning. That's exactly what we're talking about here is what you do when you go out and you do pre-incident surveys.
Mhm.
So I threw out and I said, that house could potentially have a split stairwell system. And he was like, explain. He said, I knew exactly what you were talking about, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to explain that to the group. So I explained the fact that, in these era and vintage of houses, the servant quarters were on the top level.
Mhm.
And there was only access to that from a small, narrow, steep stair casing that went directly from the kitchen area, generally in that area,
Mhm.
all the way to the third floor. You can't access the third floor from the second floor. It's not accessible. And you have a grand, what I call the grand staircase that goes up.
Yeah.
So we began talking about that, and I could just see like everybody's eyes in the room go, I never thought about that. And that's exactly what we're talking about here with that vision,
Mhm.
a change in how we do things, especially in the education world.
Yeah.
And continuing education even as well as certification. So that was just a perfect example that I could give to kind of reiterate what you're
Yeah.
talking about with people being visual.
Yeah.
Because I had one of those houses. It was a Sigma house on Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. And when I did the pre-incident survey, I found that.
Yeah.
If I never went in that building,
Mhm.
I would have never found it. And to me, that's the education and the why and the hows and everything that goes back to trigger somebody's thought process.
Yeah.
So just my thought process here. I'm throwing it in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because our mind is always working to say, okay, what do I have in front of me? And what have I seen before that looks like this?
Mhm.
We're always looking for similarities, our retrieval
Sure.
cues, if you will. And so that's one of the cool things of if we've identified the plays we're capable of playing. If you look at every major sports team, they've got a playbook.
Yeah.
Look at
Absolutely.
football. Look at baseball. They know how they're going to play together. They know, they have contingency plans with each other. It might not be as formalized as football, but when the football players go to the football field, there's only so many people there, and every department has only so many people that are going to show up, right? And they have only such a degree of competency, and they have only such a degree of equipment they can bring to the field with them, and anything might happen that day, right? And for us, we say we're all hazards, but we have a finite capacity to operate. And
Sure.
luckily we have mutual aid systems, automatic aid systems, and state systems and federal systems, and we can call more players to the team eventually. But for our initial response, for our local responses, there's only so much we can do. So let's map it out ahead of time. What solves our problems the majority of the time, majority of our calls. Let's get damn good at those things. Let's make sure
Absolutely.
we're shored up, we can execute the basics flawlessly, and then let's go to the next layer of what ifs. What's the next worst thing that we can do? But let's make sure we're solid on the basics flawlessly. And when we train in a tactics-based format, and every time we get off the rig, we're reinforcing our gears on right, our hoods on right, we're grabbing our equipment, we're moving continuously as a crew, cohesively as a crew, we're communicating, we're hitting all of those, especially in the NIOSH 5, accountability, communications, those things.
Mhm.
If we refresh on those things every time in training as an integrated training tactic, we know what play we're going to have. On the way to the call, you can be like, okay, we're going to get on scene. I'm going to pull the line. I'm going to go, he's going to do the size up. By the time I do this, we're going to know if we go to Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, or Delta, not just to the front door, because we've executed this as a team and done that. You can play like, shout out to Jerry Wells, who talks about the fire service being the ultimate team sport. We need to look at the lessons from other industries. We had an example of the Blue Angels yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Blue Angels, before every time they fly, and if you don't believe me, there's an awesome documentary on Netflix. Every time they fly, they sit down and they do chair flying.
Mhm.
And it may look silly as heck, but it's a walkthrough.
Yeah.
Sports teams do walkthroughs. Major operators, tier 1 operators do walkthroughs. We in the fire service are not isolated. We're just ignoring what's out there.
Yeah.
And if people are doing that, and let's go down the road with that. I mean, how many times do we go out and we tactically deploy things in multi-company drills? That's exactly what you're describing if we're doing it right.
Yeah.
The problem is, are we doing it right? And do our people have, and this is great for our listeners, do our people understand what right looks like? It's
Absolutely.
not just the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
And I'm all about, just because we've done it that way doesn't make it right.
Mhm.
We have to look at that. So this is some great stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, this is truly bringing a level to our listeners and to the viewers out there of maybe we haven't been doing this right.
Yeah.
And that's near and dear to me, being an ISFSI member for years upon years, being a president of the association, being involved in education, being involved like we are with FDIC, involved with fire engineering and the podcast. There are so many people that are looking to us for the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And this is pretty cool having somebody like this. To combine the two shows together and have somebody like this is like a jackpot win.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
you don't get any better than this.
Well, kind of reflecting on what you're saying as you're saying it. Thank you first and foremost for having me on. Of course, I should have said that sooner. But you asked earlier about how do we change testing? How do we get the states to change? How do we make that criteria change? It's really a minimal impact on what we do in the fire service. Because once you get the test, you move on. Where this is really impactful is adapting it at the company level, adapting it at the department level. The states, the certification has no regulation of that for the most part. Of when you take your guys out to the tailboard, what are we going to do today? If we adapted at those levels, one of the major complaints you see at the state level towards this process is, oh, nobody's going to want to do walkthroughs. They're not going to want to do this. We're going to get pushback. This is this looks weird kind of deal.
Right.
And we kind of had it in the class yesterday. And every time I present that's one of the big pushbacks of, oh, I don't want to do walkthroughs. That I don't want to play make believe. But working in the abstract teaches us better. Working in the abstract, working in the chain tactics, we learn so much better. And if we as individuals, if we have training officers aren't willing to step up and go, guys, we're going to try this. Humor me. Give me 2 months with this. And if you don't like it in 2 months, we can 86 it, but at least try it. In 2 months, if you're doing it right, if you're talking about what our capabilities are, if we're saying this is the way we chain behead, when we get on fire scene, I want you to do this, you to do this, you to do this. And we have defined tactics for people to execute and practice. When they get on fire scene, they can adapt as needed. But if we start out at least with a game plan, it removes ambiguity. And ambiguity, not knowing what's happening, that uncertainty, is a huge reason that we have stress. When people think they have a certain degree of control and a certain degree of certainty, that gives them confidence, And with confidence, we can stay in our prefrontal cortex when we get on the fire scene. We know what's going to happen. We know they're going to do this, do this, do this. Until we have that outlier event, we can move like a well-oiled machine. Well, if we know, hey, we just got to get the fire out and we show up and everybody starts improvising and trying to do what they think they need done and we're not communicating. I mean, we've seen the outcome of that 100 times every year, typically, right?
Yeah. So I got a thought process for you. And we're going to wrap it. I want to see what both of y'all think about this. Online learning that we do, this, like where we send stuff out to the department, because I get to do that. They hate me for it, but I get to do it. But when I send something out, and I do a lot of custom activities in our platform, I give them stuff to use. Doesn't say they have to use it. It's here's resources for you, but this is the topic. And let's just use ladders. That's a good one since it kind of fits your show.
Yeah.
So when I send out with ladders, and she hit on something right here, and I want your thoughts. Why are company officers not doing this?
Well, in my opinion, there's a number of different reasons. One is they feel intimidated because maybe their proficiency level is not what it should be. So they don't want to look like a fool and go out and not be able to do what they're supposed to be teaching. I think part of it is say, well, we go on, 80 fires a year, we're going to, at least a couple fires a week, and we don't need to do this because we do it for real, right? Which that's another topic, but I think it's just laziness, complacency is a big part of it. I mean, like I said, we could go on and on. We could spend an hour just coming up with reasons that the company officers don't do their training, right? But you got to be motivated. You've got to want to do it, as a company officer in order to know that you want to make your crew the best. And that's what I always told. And some of the things you're talking about, I used to do when I was a company officer with my crews. And I would say, if we're the first engine, we know what our roles and responsibilities are at the Indianapolis Fire Department. You're going to be the plug man. You're going to be pulling the shoulder carry, and I'm going to be doing the 360, giving the size up, right? Or if I was a truck officer or second truck, we know second truck's responsibility is ventilation. So you're grabbing an extension ladder. I'm grabbing a roof ladder. I've got a 6 foot. So we had that playbook up front, right? And you can do this, like you said, you can do the same thing with newer firefighters or even incumbents that are learning a new skill for the first time, just having those conversations, laying that out, and then they get that. But I kind of pivoted off of your company officer training topic there.
But it's relevant, and I'm in the late great Bill Guston mode here, being a student. I'm like, I'm gonna have to go back and watch this show just so that I can take my notes, because I'm like wanting to sit here and write so much stuff down. Mm-hmm. So you work in two worlds. Give me your thoughts on why the company officer doesn't do that. Yeah.
So to respond first to his, two themes I heard was confidence and complacency. Mm-hmm. In our world, once we develop the tactic that we call a job task analysis, once we develop the job task analysis, it's not just for one person, it's for 4 people. Every lesson is for the whole crew to work integrated in that space. Once we have that video, that instructional video, we as department training officer can say, hey, company officers, this block, we're doing this. And we're going to do a multi-company training on it on this day. Here's that detailed job task analysis, and here's a QR code to that video. We're going to be training on this multi-company in a week. What do you think they're going to go do?
Look at it.
Are they going to go watch that video? Are they going to go drill on their company level? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's motivation. So we can set them up for success, teach them the replacement behavior, and bring them in. Now, the second part to that is the complacency part. Is if we're not giving them coaching, if we're not spot checking their efficiencies, if we're not showing up to help them say, hey, yeah, you're doing this great, but what about this? And validating where they're succeeding and identifying where they're failing, then they can't be complacent that, oh, yeah, we're good enough. No, you're not good enough. I just told you suck at that. So you need to work on that, right?
Yeah.
So if we're not showing up to our company officers, and sometimes once our folks hit that company level, we let them go a little feral and we stop paying attention to them. They got it, right?
Sure.
And that's when they need the most help, because now they're stuck in that buddy to boss cycle. Now they're stuck in managing their people, and they're still human because they're still struggling with the stuff that they struggle with as a firefighter. Like we put more on them and we take away their support. And we as training folks need to be there to continue supporting them and supporting each other. Training is really the culture and leadership center of the department, because as we say on the fire, in a non-discretionary time environment, as goes the first line, so goes the fire.
Sure. Absolutely.
For me, in our non-discretionary fire department management, as goes training, so goes the department, right? So if we as the core training group or the collaborating training company officers who are focused on good quality training, if we're becoming negligent of our people, which we know is our greatest resource, we can't blame them for falling down the job. We did it first, right?
Yeah.
So circling back to your primary question about online training, why don't we do online training? Because what are we getting out of it? Going back to sensory stimulus theory, reading is the lowest amount of recall we have. Yeah, it's visual. We're going to see the words, but it's abstract. Until we have an opportunity to discuss it, apply it, recall it, have somebody spot check and calibrate our understanding, we're not actually going to learn anything from reading. We're going to have an interpretation, but it's going to be highly divergent from everybody around us. It can actually be a big point of conflict. I do use hybrid environments for my classes. And when I use those, the stuff that I put in the online environment is either pre-course work that I want them to have an exposure to, so that in course when we talk about it, it might trigger retrieval, and that gives them a retrieval process. And the fact that they didn't remember it the first time will go, I should probably pay more attention here, right?
Yeah.
I don't got it. That same spot check we talked about earlier. So what I put in an online content is stuff that either, okay, for the sake of the order, let's be 100% honest, I just need to check a box that you were exposed to this topic for 15 minutes, right? Because we all have those topics that
Sure.
we don't feel are relevant to us operationally, but we have to check the box. Perfect online content, right? Or reference material. You know, if it's something I want them to be able to go back and look at and go back and look at, go back and look at, perfect online content. But if it's something that's mission critical, that needs to be a face-to-face. That needs to be a discussion. That needs to be a Zoom. That needs to be something that we're holding people accountable for having actual competency to discuss the topic. And until we put hands-on tools, competency to discuss the topic is the highest level that we can expect of them.
So, again, I'm in my Bill Gusta mode here.
Yes.
When I put stuff out, and tell me your thoughts too, because I want to hear both of you. I've actually turned to student mode here.
Yeah.
Just to make sure I'm doing things the way I think they should be done, is I send stuff out, and it'll have a PowerPoint curriculum. It could have an instructor outline. It could have skills. Nothing says you got to use that.
Mhm.
Let's say I throw it out on ladders. I put all that there so it's a resource for the true trainer of the fire service, which is the company officer,
Yes.
to be able to use. And it's a format they come back and they can document what they did. You know, they can add other comments. You know, I don't really care so much what they do, as in you should know what you need to do,
Mhm.
so to speak. So that's how I do that. That's kind of how we go about doing those things. And it gives that ability to get out and actually teach what they're doing hands-on. So that's the concept that I use. Based on your philosophies here, I think we're meeting that.
Okay.
Am I on target?
Well, are you getting the desired outcome?
Yeah, that's the whole idea, is the desired outcome of being proficient. Now, proficiency for somebody that's in one district and what they got to do versus another district and what they've got to do is different. Whether it's a 35 or a 24 districts, you know what I'm saying? So that's the whole purpose. So I'm curious, are we doing, because I want to make it better.
Right.
Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing?
Are you wanting the districts to perform the same, or is it okay that we have different divergent competencies?
It's okay.
Okay.
Different is a realism in my world. I mean, I described this. Aaron's heard this before. I go from 40-story high rises to swamp skaters and cottonmouths.
Sure.
And the most expensive thing is a combine. I'm 1,255 square miles. How different can it be? I mean, geez. I mean, you can't make that stuff up. So, with y'all's expertise, I'm looking for, are we doing it right? Are we doing it wrong? What do we need to fix? How do we need to change? And I think this may help our listeners too, because I know that there's probably people asking the same question in their heads that are out there watching us. So what's your thoughts?
Well, I know from my personal life experiences, having been the guy that did those monthly trainings for 6 years, I think I always tried to provide a lot of the general outline reference material that you talked about. Sometimes there would be a full program. Sometimes it would be hey, here's 6 bullet points on drafting or whatever. Go out and, review this, right?
Video, whatever.
Yeah. But I think in the training world, we're maxed out as much as anybody, right? I mean, you've got recruits. So if you're maybe running a fire academy, you've got incumbents. Oh, by the way, you've got to do officer development, and if you don't have the staffing to do that, I think, at least from my personal experience, we're doing the best we can. We're trying to get better. But that's a challenge in and of itself that's kind of separate from how we're delivering this material. is having the staffing to do a lot of these things. Because you said it, as you said, with it takes a lot more people to do an interactive assessment of somebody than it does to have 50 people sitting in a classroom with one proctor while they take a multiple choice test, right? So I think that it's going to take a while as we try and make the learning environment better. Not that we haven't made improvements. I think we have across individual departments and nationally, right? But I think that the staffing and having access to the resources is always going to be a hurdle. What's the first thing that gets cut in the fire department budget a lot of times?
Training.
Take it from training, right? So the same people, like as you said, as goes the training, so goes the fire department, right? So it's almost like, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face when we trim back that training budget because we can't meet our overtime or our contracts or whatever. So it's a challenge.
Well, and just like I state that unpopular opinion is we say we're all hazards. We can't do everything.
Right.
At some point, we need to admit our context and identify what we can do and what we can't do and get really great at what we can do before we start branching back out to what additional can we take on. And with training as well, is when I ask, is it okay that the divisions are different in competency? We have to triage our expectations. Where is it we need training to be today to keep the department alive today? And then once we satisfy that minimum goal, because the firefighters might be here for the citizens, but in training, we're here for the firefighters.
Absolutely. Internal custody.
Right. Yeah. Our job is to teach them how to do the dangerous things safely so that they can get all the cowboy stuff done that needs done, that they can be as aggressive as they can, calculatedly aggressive. We need to equip them to do that well. And that's our job, because them coming home ultimately is all of our responsibilities. I make the joke, you wouldn't hawk the fire truck to go on vacation. So we can't hawk a firefighter for the ego of we're all hazards.
Right.
So we have to triage also in our training world of what does right look like? What is our minimum standard of excellence? And if it's, hey, company officers, we're going to give you these resources, you can use them, you don't have to use them. If that's the expectation we're setting, then we're happy with the outcome. If there's no standard for success, then all participation or non-participation is successful. If our emphasis is training only has the resources to run an academy and the rest of the department can go feral, well, let's integrate the rest of the department. Let's start pulling those guys off the shift to be force multipliers in the academy. And what we teach them in the academy, they can start now bringing cohesion out back to the department. Because one thing we see when we keep our academy staff separate from our operational staff is we learn and we get really good in the academy. And then we send people out to the fields. And us dinosaurs, when we get them, we go, why the heck are you doing it that way? In my day, we've been doing it this way for 20 years and it's never needed changed. Well, that's because we in training have failed to bring the whole department along as we've modernized tactics and response. So we have to have communication, and we can have that segregated of here's company training, here's academy training. And just like this is the classroom, this is psychomotor skills, then we have to do a whole bunch more work to bridge those things. But the more we can train in integration across academy and company, and the more we can train in integration in the way that we train, the less effort we have to do in that bridging.
Okay.
Well, we're getting the queue up here.
Yeah, we are.
We've run our time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I thank you very much. Very informative. Leaves me with more questions. As many answers as we got today, as much information as you provided it. I have more questions, right? So I've got some of those books that you referenced in your class yesterday that I sat in on.
Great.
I looked up the one from Erickson last night just to reading about them. So anyway, I've got some reading to do, and I'm still going to stay a student of the game, I guess, is the best I can say it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think we all have similar philosophies, right? Just because we've been doing this for a while doesn't mean that we know everything. There's still room for us to. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know, right? Or whatever that saying is. So that's kind of where I'm at. So I really appreciate it. Chief Klein,
Well, Aaron, first of all, I'm very proud of this young lady for the things that she's accomplished and what she's doing. I think you're going to have a profound impact on the educational world of the fire service.
Yeah.
So thank you for also being a part of the show, and we want to thank Firehouse Subs as well for being a
Absolutely.
sponsor of the podcasts and the video blogs, the things like that they're doing. And it's great to join you. It's great
Absolutely.
great to cross pollinate. So
Absolutely.
to our listeners, to the next time you see Eric, myself, and when you see this rock star over here in the future, know that she's bringing a power-packed message, and you ought to be listening.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, tremendously. And keep in mind, none of this is my own. I'm a specialist of R&D, and that's rip off and duplicate. So let's find bigger, better, and best, and let's move it forward.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right.